Hello. All right. So first I want to thank Diego and Molly for inviting me to speak, and Aaron for setting up the stage for me. So I work in the field of early modern or Renaissance studies, and this paper is on John Milton's Paradise Lost, as Diego mentioned. It's a text, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's a text that Milton wrote in the mid-17th century that retells the story of creation and the fall of humankind, retells this that's told in the book of Genesis. So he's retelling it here. It's considered like one of the greatest literary works of all time, certainly in the English canon, at the very least. So I'm going to be arguing that, and these two passages that I'm going to be talking about, the two stories, Adam's story of origin and Eve's story of origin, are in the program, as Diego mentioned. And I'll be citing passages from it. And I'll try to remember to tell you what line I'm on. There are line numbers there if you want to follow along. I would love to have feedback at the end of it. If you guys have like different takes on the passage or think that want to contribute your own take to it. What I'm about to read is my take on these passages. I'm going to be arguing that Milton transforms the story of Genesis from being a story we all might be familiar with, one where Adam is first made and therefore original, and Eve is second made, secondary, and hence derivative. She's derivative, and therefore weaker. That's kind of the story we're all familiar with. Milton comes along, I think, and transforms the story to one that instead suggests that originality is not merely determined by chronology, who was first made or second made, or what you're made from, the material you're made from, Eve being made from Adam's rib. That instead, Milton suggests that in retelling stories, which is what he's doing here in Paradise Lost, he's retelling the story of Genesis, that in retelling stories, one can make oneself original, so you can become original. In his epic, composed of 12 books, Milton allows both Adam and Eve to tell the stories of the moments they first woke up. Those two passages in front of you. We will begin with Adam's story, which describes how he wakes up, explores nature for a while, and then starts wondering where he came from, at which point he addresses his environment, specifically the sun and the sky. Then we will turn to Eve's story, which describes how she woke up, immediately starts wondering about her origins, and then looks over to a lake and sees herself, her own image. She falls in love with this image and must be warned by a disembodied voice. A lot of people assume this voice is God's voice, but there's no way we can know that, I think, importantly. And so this voice warns her to leave her image and go to Adam. By letting us hear their stories from their own mouths, Milton highlights these stories as stories. Through first-person narration, they are retold at a much later time. And even though he can't get around Milton being first made, he's, after all, still limited by the overall story of Genesis. Milton puts Eve's story first in the text, in Book 4, and shows us how inventive her story is compared to Adam's. In other words, he marks Eve, through her storytelling skills, as a creator in her own right, a creator of ideas and hence original, and suggests that Adam is the derivative one, since he gets most of his ideas in Book 8 from her. It is important to know that the stakes of Milton's project in retelling Genesis and making originality available to all who are inventive enough were very high. Milton published Paradise Lost in 1667, at a time when much was up for grabs. The English had, within the last 20 to 30 years, created numerous, often conflicting political and religious factions for the first time in English history. It was a very contentious time. Killed a king for the first time in history, set up a republic in place of the monarchy, watched their republic under Cromwell turn into a dictatorship, reestablished the monarchy, all while various religious factions flourished. With much up for grabs then, Milton sees a golden opportunity not only to put himself forward as an incredibly original author, and it worked. He's considered, with Shakespeare, one of the greatest English authors, one of the greatest authors who's ever lived. Is a very calculated move on his part, though, to put himself forward as that author. But he also retells the story of gender. This is an opportunity for him to remake that story as well. From what you know of Milton, and indeed this is the general consensus in my field, you might think of him as a misogynist. However, I am going to argue the opposite, that in fact, Milton was a closet feminist. So beginning with Adam's story, which is placed in book 8. When Adam tells about waking to find himself the first human being, he begins the story with the difficulty of describing these first moments, because the story is not just his, but that of all humankind. He says, quote, this is line 249, "For a man to tell how human life began is hard, for who himself beginning knew? His initial state of ignorance is not just ignorance of how he began, but of how to tell a story. To, quote, tell how something happened is unequivocally hard." As he narrates what occurred during these first moments, Adam imposes an understanding of his awakening self retroactively. When he first wakes up, his mind is a blank slate, and thus unable to impose any meaning upon his first experiences at the time they occur. Initially then, Adam does not think at all. He only experiences his environment physically, through movement and through his senses. Once knowledge is gained, it cannot help but inform future act, thoughts, decisions, and stories. For the first few moments then, God purposefully staves off this necessity, allowing Adam to just hear the birds and smell the flowers and marvel at his own body parts, which are the first maybe 15 lines of his passage, or him just experiencing his environment physically. As he experiences the world physically, Adam inevitably accrues knowledge, and as he tells his story, he emphasizes the confusion he felt when he could find no one with whom to discuss it. As soon as he discovers the capacity of speech, Adam uses it to talk to his environment, specifically the sun and the sky above. He tells the sun the parts of the story he already knows, about, quote, hills and dales, rivers, woods, and plains, about the enlightened earth so fresh and gay, and he asks the sun to fill in the parts he does not yet know, quote, and this is line 273, "Tell if ye saw how I came thus, how here, not of myself, by some great maker then." The sun, of course, does not respond, and, quote, "When none answer came, Adam pensive sat me down." It's line 285. In this moment, Adam experiences the desire for an interlocutor, that is, someone with whom to carry on a dialogue, someone who both listens and responds. This desire is intensified since he can find no one, and so he becomes pensive. He can only ponder this lack until he finds a responsive audience. Built into Adam's waking consciousness is firstly a sense of causality, the if-then terms by which narratives are shaped. If he exists, then there must have been some great maker who made him, as he tells the sun. And also built into his consciousness is a need for someone to listen and react to his story. In his question to the sun, then, Adam is really asking for an interlocutor, someone who can help him construct a story of what has happened so far. And when he does not find one, we witness the formation of Adam's psyche with a built-in anxiety that despite all attempts to find someone to listen, such a one might never be found, or, if found, might be lost. From this point forward, Adam is painfully aware of pleasing his audience in order to keep them. Everything he says and does is in